We're at Secure Distribution Site 1. It's the 2nd of June. It's right about 5 a.m. The Israeli Defense Forces have released their holding line.
From May to October 2025, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was the main distributor of food in Gaza. During that time, the United Nations said that more than 1,000 people were killed trying to get aid at its sites. Backed by the United States and Israel, the GHF system had powerful political support. So what made it so dangerous? With the program now closed, Airwars visualizes how the GHF system forced Palestinians into a deadly race for food, and may set a precedent for conflicts to come. Airwars reconstructed 2 aid distributions to visually explain the dangerous design of the only aid mechanism then available to the people of Gaza. Based on hours of footage and interviews with aid seekers and 2 former GHF contractors, we show how, from design to execution, the militarized aid system made deaths and injuries near inevitable. To get aid, each day thousands of Palestinians travelled along supposed safe routes that often crossed through IDF combat zones. Many were shot before they even reached the GHF sites. In the desperate rush, most of the food was gone in a matter of minutes, after which armed contractors forced civilians out. They left only to often face IDF gunfire again. Before the GHF, the UN and other aid organisations such as Oxfam operated hundreds of non-militarised aid points across the Strip, embedded within civilian infrastructure, providing Palestinians with immediate access to aid. While some aid was stolen from trucks, the system was designed to ensure it reached the most vulnerable.
We've been doing it for years. The people are experienced, the systems are tried and tested. There's nothing wrong with that system. It doesn't need replacing. It needs to be allowed to work.
But on March 2nd, Israel blocked all aid from entering Gaza for nearly 3 months. Established just months prior, the GHF then became Gaza's primary aid distributor, opening its first site on May 27th. The US State Department quickly approved $30 million in funding for the foundation. Near-daily reports of civilians killed or injured emerged once the system was launched, with the UN Human Rights Office recording 1,298 people killed in the vicinity of GHF distribution sites in approximately 4 months. In August, the World Health Organization declared famine in Gaza for the first time. By then, the GHF system had been operating for 2 months. UG Solutions, a GHF subcontractor responsible for securing distributions, said it took time for them to develop ways to safely distribute food to tens of thousands of people.
We didn't understand the level of desperation, which was probably a bit naive on our end.
Oxfam told Airwars that opening just 4 aid sites that people had to travel to created an inevitable environment of chaos.
The other thing that we do in Gaza is we go to where people are. There is a significant amount of harm that people could face in any context, let alone Gaza, moving from one place to another. And that is something that we really try to avoid.
GHF established 4 sites for delivering aid, 3 based in the south and 1 in Wadi Gaza, all within IDF-controlled territory. While there were minor architectural differences, the 4 sites operated in similar ways. 2 US private security firms, Safe Reach Solutions and UG Solutions, were contracted by the GHF to manage the logistics and distribution of aid. In the run-up to the opening, UGS hired nearly 300 private security contractors, many of them US military veterans. According to 2 former UGS personnel, the contractors were divided into teams of 12. 3 static teams were permanently assigned to each site, working in rotations so that the site was patrolled 24/7. During a distribution, a mobile team would join the static team on site. Armed with lethal and crowd control weapons, UGS contractors were the only security personnel inside the GHF sites. Built on the ruins of the Palestinian neighbourhood of Tal al-Sultan, this is Secure Distribution Site 1 in early June. The team on duty formed in the early hours of June 2nd, former UG Solutions contractor Anthony Aguilar told Airwars. 12 contractors were assigned to security towers, some of which were equipped with machine guns, atop the berms and within the site. The remaining contractors were assigned positions on foot within the site. GHF disputed the structure and positioning of the teams as described by 2 former contractors to Airwars, but did not provide further details. IDF tanks were positioned north of the site, Aguilar said, blocking intersections to stop civilians entering SDS-1 before distribution began. The tanks acted as a valve, controlling the flow of people in and out of the sites. Security cameras at each site transmitted live footage from ongoing distributions to an operations centre on the Israeli border with Gaza, where IDF personnel and contractors affiliated with GHF sat side by side. The IDF also maintained a position at the Kuwaiti hospital, 2 former contractors said. UGS refused to comment on specific security arrangements, but denied their contractors had machine guns. Representatives also claimed that Anthony Aguilar was a known liar who was fired for cause. Aguilar said he resigned from his role with UGS. Hammam was preparing to leave his tent in Khan Yunis, where he and 11 family members were living after they were displaced from Rafah City. At 23 years old, Hammam was his family's primary provider, and they desperately needed food. At 3 a.m, he travelled to the site.
رحنا وحالفناش الحظ من هناك يعني أنا عرضت نفسي للموت وللخطر.
Around the same time Hammam set off towards SDS-1, Anthony Aguilar, then the Joint Tactical Operations Director for UG Solutions, entered Gaza via the Kerem Shalom crossing in a UGS convoy of aid trucks and armoured vehicles. Once the convoy reached SDS-1, contractors began unloading the aid boxes into the main distribution area. Once they were done, armoured vehicles were typically used to establish a defensive line behind the contractors and facing the crowd, said Aguilar. Just north of the site, half a kilometre before Al-Alam roundabout, heavy gunfire from IDF positions began. Over the next hour and a half, Hammam laid on the ground to avoid the bullets, but even while sheltering for his life, he tried to edge forward in the crowd to secure food for his family. Back at the site, prep was almost complete, but, Aguilar said, sometimes the IDF would tell contractors to start distribution before they were prepared, since the IDF static position at the Kuwaiti hospital gave them a clear view of the site.
They'd be like, yes, the trucks are unloaded, however, we're still trying to establish our security, so wait. And they often would not wait. They would just release the lines.
The contractors eventually learnt that gunfire indicated the line had been released, Aguilar said. Aguilar was standing within the entrance of SDS-1 whilst contractors finished setting up the site.
It was just kind of a constant surround sound audio of gunfire in the background.
The IDF fired from the rear to push people south towards the site, Aguilar said.
The way that the Israeli Defense Forces would communicate with the Palestinians was through shooting at them.
Hundreds of civilians, including Hammam, amassed to the north of the site. The tanks moved, allowing the crowd to rush in.
الناس صارت تجري يعني لما انتبه مش يعني إنه هو يعني مكسب مطمر أو خلاص يعني أمان.
Within just 8 to 10 minutes, most of the aid was taken, with little to nothing left for people still entering the sites. The first-come, first-served system led to widespread chaos as crowds rushed to access limited aid. The most vulnerable were often left empty-handed.
The people that would get to these sites first were those that could run the fastest, the strongest, the fittest.
والله يا أخوي أنا تقريبا يعني 8 مرات أنا زرت المناطق وكانت يعني ولا مرة أنا يعني حصلت على طعام فيها أو أي يعني أكل.
IDF and GHF affiliated personnel stationed at the headquarters could see from the security cameras that the aid had gone. Despite thousands of civilians still waiting to enter, contractors were told to close the site. Aguilar explained what typically happened next.
The UG Solutions contractors would then essentially get online and begin spraying pepper spray into the crowd, at the crowd, which would then be followed by the throwing of stun grenades into the crowds to get the crowd running the opposite way.
Videos of US contractors spraying pepper spray directly into the faces of civilians and firing less lethal weapons into crowds circulated online. UG Solutions told Airwars that they follow an escalation of force policy under which less lethal munitions and live fire were a last resort.
Can you get people to stop harming each other or potentially harming you through the use of your body? Then can you go to use of a non-lethal munition, whether it be a stun grenade or in most cases, if it's up close and personal, pepper spray.
But force is not part of a typical humanitarian distribution, Oxfam told Airwars.
We go to an enormous amount of trouble to try and make those distributions safe because they can be very chaotic. But there are ways of doing crowd control and things like that that certainly should never involve injury or death of those people.
Whilst many GHF-related harm allegations are attributed to the IDF, the role of US contractors and their impact on civilians remains less understood. So who were the armed US contractors stationed in Israel? Job advertisements published by UG Solutions and SafeReach Solutions sought people with combat experience, with preference for Special Forces veterans. UGS acknowledged that job opportunities circulated through informal channels in the contractor community to reach prospective contractors who were not already in their database. Among them was the Infidels Motorcycle Club, a biker gang criticised for promoting Islamophobic and anti-Arab sentiment. The BBC reported that a member of the club, Johnny Taz Mulford, would eventually lead the entire operation for UG Solutions in Gaza for around 3 months. Mulford did not respond to a request for comment. UGS said they reject extremism in all forms and that a fraction of their total contractor personnel were associated with the motorcycle club, calling the BBC article salacious.
They made the bad decision in their early days of coming up with a name that is offensive to a portion of the world's population, and in an attempt to be sort of funny and cute and harken back to what they were called during their time doing war on terror operations, and it's come back to bite them, but they are not as advertised.
Mulford posted on Facebook asking veterans who were able to shoot and travel within the next 12 hours to reach out to him. 270 US contractors were hired, flying from Dulles, Virginia to Tel Aviv on May 17th, just over a week before SDS-1 opened. Contractors were armed with an assault rifle and a pistol, as well as pepper spray, stun grenades, rubber bullets and riot batons, UG Solutions confirmed. They said contractors had to qualify on these weapons, but a former contractor said otherwise.
Although these are like less lethal munitions, they're still dangerous. You can't throw a flashbang at someone, right? Like, there's a safe distance with which you're supposed to throw it. And what is that distance? Nobody knows, because nobody was ever trained on it.
Some of the contractors start spraying the pepper spray, spraying. And then as they got near the crowd, would start throwing stun grenades, pushing the crowd out.
The practice Aguilar described was captured as distribution was ending at SDS-4 on June 8th. At 6:24 a.m, this video caught the moment a contractor threw a stun grenade towards civilians within the site. SDS-4 operated similarly to SDS-1. There was one entrance and one exit. Contractors sat in security towers on the berms. IDF tanks were positioned around the perimeter to open and close the route to the site, but SDS-4 had narrow fenced corridors within the entrance route, funneling civilians down even smaller walkways. Prior to June 8th, the design of SDS-4's entrance had created large crowds where IDF tanks were stationed. The IDF decided to switch the entrance and exit around for future aid deliveries, said Aguilar. On June 8th, civilians entered the site through the new entrance. But, Aguilar said, an IDF tank was stationed close to the new exit. The contractors were told to direct civilians to exit out of the same corridor they had used to enter the site.
So the entrance has become so chaotic with people trying to leave and come in at the same point.
UGS directed questions about site configurations to GHF, which refused to comment, but said that aid seekers did not care about what is deemed the proper entrance or exit when they were coming to a site en masse. Ibrahim, having left home at 6 in the morning, arrived when the site was already open.
وكنت رايح على أمل إني أوفر أكل لأهلي، واللي شفته جدا صعب. عدد كبير من الناس الجوعى يعني ينتظرون المساعدات، وعدد قليل جدا منهم اللي قدر ياخد، والعدد الكبير اللي روح إيد ورا وإيد قدام.
While civilians were pushed into the narrow corridor from both directions, contractors were throwing stun grenades and firing live ammunition at the ground and above people's heads. Ibrahim was among the crowd being forced out.
في منهم كانوا يسيبونا، وفي منهم كانوا يعصبوا ويزقونا ويحاولوا يدافشوا فينا. لما مثلا تخلص الوقت يبدو إطلاق النار في الجو، يبدو قنابل دخانية وقنابل صوت بين الناس. وصراحة الأسلوب اللي بيتعاملوا فيه معنا أسلوب همجي طبعا الأغلبية.
They're shooting into and at the crowd, at their feet, over their head, into the crowd.
Within just 6 minutes, a contractor threw a stun grenade directly into the middle of the crowd. Shots were fired from the burn as shown by spent cartridges flying through the air. And a contractor fired at the ground towards people's feet. UGS representatives said their contractors never fired live ammunition into crowds, and that shooting at the ground was not common procedure.
So if he fired at the ground, at the feet of someone, there was probably a reason. It wasn't a haphazard situation.
Once civilians left the site, they were subjected to IDF gunfire.
يوم 8 يونيو إطلاق النار كان كثيف جدا، ويومها صار في إصابات وصار في شهداء.
With first responders unable to enter the vicinity of the sites, dozens of injured people had to be carried by other aid seekers. The aid distribution processes on June 2nd and June 8th illustrate a wider picture of civilian harm, where those seeking vital food were in danger at each step of the aid delivery process.
أنا ما بنصح أي حدا يروح، لأنه موت اللي بيصير، موت يا أخوي، لأنه إحنا قاعدين بنرمي نفسنا الموت عشان ناكل، عشان لقمة العيش.
From May 27th to October 3rd, Airwars monitored a total of 322 alleged incidents of civilian harm, attributed to the IDF and in proximity to the GHF sites, with the most in August. In a statement, the IDF said it operated in the vicinity of the aid sites to enable the aid distribution while continuing IDF operational activity in the Gaza Strip, and that incidents of civilian harm have been placed under review by the relevant authorities within the IDF. Following the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in October, GHF sites were quietly dismantled. GHF officially ceased operations on November 24th, stating it had delivered a total of 187 million meals.
سمعت خبر إغلاق المواقع وكان خبر جدا سعيد بالنسبة إلي لأغلب قطاع غزة يعني. إنه خلص انتهت المصيدة بالنسبة إلنا.
Between May and October, hundreds of civilian harm allegations were linked to the GHF aid delivery system. People were shot by the IDF, attacked with pepper spray by American contractors, and killed or injured in crowd crashes and stampedes. Many, such as Hammam and Ibrahim, risked death only to discover that no food remained.
بس إنه يعني يشوفونا حل من نقدر يعني هيك إحنا نطعمي عائلتنا ونطعمي أهلنا بدون ما نموت يعني.
GHF told Airwars the documentary was built on inaccurate information provided by disgruntled former contractor Anthony Aguilar. It said that gunfire is endemic to Gaza and heard across the Strip, but civilians were not subjected to gunfire, ever. Though its operation in Gaza has now ended, the GHF has set a precedent for the dangerous militarization of aid. In its final report, GHF said its mission was temporary but transformative, and left behind a proven model for what effective humanitarian aid looks like in conflict zones.